Okay, so let's talk about the sensory properties of food. After all, food science is partially about the preparation of food, but a great deal of food science deals with our perception of food and how we interpret and evaluate food. This photograph you can see is an evaluation plate where we evaluate foods based on a more clinical approach. We spend a great deal of time doing this, and it's a very big interest to food companies because, after all, if food has a better sensory quality, whether it be sight or taste or smell, it's going to sell better. So there's a lot of phrases and concepts in the chapter about senses and about sensory aspect of food. The first two that we see here are some of the most important. Sensory perception. After all, everything we know about the world is what we perceive through our senses. So whatever our senses feed our brain is what we get in the world. Now, then there's sensory evaluation. Once we get the information, what are we going to do with it? How can we go about interpreting and then verbalizing and actually being able to communicate what we're feeling and what we're perceiving to someone else. All these other words, hue, opacity, sheen, these all deal with the visual. Flavor is another aspect of sensory perception. It deals with the mouth and the nose. Umami is one of the five tastes. We'll get into chemoreceptors, which has to do with our taste buds, and ortho and retronasal olfaction, which has a lot to do with our sense of smell. Papillae deals with the taste buds. And then some other words here, astringency and trigeminal effects. These are unique to the way we eat food. And of course, mouth feel. How does it feel in the mouth? After all, people are very picky about what they eat, and a great deal of that has to do with texture. It has to do with how it feels in the mouth. So let's dive in. Sensory perception. Receptors on sense organs detect stimuli. So our taste buds give us information. Our eyes give us information. Our olfactory bulb in our nose gives us perception, gives us an idea of what we are experiencing, and also the rods and the cones in the eyes. Hair cells in the inner ears help us with hearing, help us understand the more subtle aspects of things. But remember, hearing is also real important when it comes to food because we hear crunch and other things going on in our mouth. We hear it inside of our head, and it does does create a different perception of certain foods. So the brain, we interpret all these signals as best we can, and what we've learned to do over time is not only recognize things that are familiar to us, but also to find enjoyment in new experiences as well. All right, so appearance is a big part of what we perceive with food. I mean, after all, they say you eat with your eyes before you do with your mouth. People come back from a buffet and they say, boy, my eyes were too big. My eyes were bigger than my stomach. There's a reason we say that, and the reason why is because we get excited. Our eyes excite our whole conscious mind when it comes to food. And because we read food with our eyes, we also create foods that have a variety of color, a variety of different appearance. Aroma, of course, very important. If you can't smell, then it's very difficult for you to enjoy food the same way as you would if you could smell. Imagine when you have a bad cold and your nose is all stuffed up and you can't smell very well. You also can't taste food the same way, and you don't enjoy it nearly as much. So aroma leads to flavor. Flavor is really a combination of what we taste and what we smell. And then there's texture. Different textures, especially a variety of textures, makes food a lot more enjoyable. All right, so then evaluation. When we evaluate food, it's not just simply saying, that's good. That's good. Yeah, well, that's fine, but that's not enough. We need to know more. It's the systematic and objective evaluation of the sensory properties of food. If you're going to compare product A with product B, you need to be able to communicate why one is better than the other, what is it that makes them different. And this is a big part of what we do when it comes to food science is going through that evaluation process. It's different than eating for enjoyment. When you're evaluating, especially you're evaluating a lot of different foods, you're going to find that when you're comparing 2 or 3 or 4 different things, you're going to find that it's not as enjoyable anymore. Instead, it's rather clinical. It's also really it's really very scientific. When it comes to evaluating food, there are people that have different levels of ability. Naturally born with, some people are naturally born with a higher level of ability when it comes to tasting. And the example of that is there are people out there we call super tasters, and there are people out there we call non-tasters. And a non-taster isn't someone who can't taste anything. It just means that their sense of taste is much less sensitive than someone who's a super taster. But even super tasters, when it comes to evaluation, it takes practice and concentration. If you've ever read an article about tasting of wine, for example, wine tasters out there who are professionals have very detailed descriptions of how the wine tastes and what makes this wine better than that wine. In the process of doing that, they might taste, 20 different wines, and you would think that it would be overwhelming. Well, it is, and it takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of practice and concentration to be able to differentiate between the subtleties in foods. Appearance is, as I said, we eat with our eyes. Sight is developed highly in humans. We have a very good sense of sight. We have a very good sense of color. We don't see everything. After all, when the lights are out, you can definitely tell that your dog or cat can definitely see better in the dark than you can. But when it's light out and when we have good lighting, we can see an amazing level of detail. Now, we have different things that affect our view of food. The color, for example, we refer to that as hue, which is simple colors like red, blue, green. There's also opacity. Opacity is the relative transparency or lack of it. So some foods do have the ability to have transparency, translucency, and some products are not like that at all. So this contrasts with clarity or translucency, cloudiness, the general appearance of opacity and how light affects a product and how it looks. Generally, sheen is another thing. We generally like things that have good gloss, but at the same time, there are sometimes foods are contrasted with glossy items and items that are more matte or dull. Sometimes one is better than the other, depending on the food. And then, of course, when it comes to appearance, our perception of appearance is based on light that reflects or bounces off a product. Now, when we talk about translucency, we're also talking about light that's transmitted or passes through an object. And that gives us a certain sense of what that food is made of, gives us a sense of what it's going to feel like in the mouth, gives us a sense of how it's going. We get a lot of perceptions in our mind about how it's supposed to look and how it does look. So our perception of appearance is definitely affected by the light source. Definitely different light sources make a huge difference in food. Sunlight, for example, as compared to, let's say, fluorescent light, candle light. These things definitely affect things. One of the reasons why people like candles at a nice dinner is because it adds a nice warm light. That warm light makes everything look a little bit better. It also feeds into our historical context of candles being associated with romance. So that affects our perception of the meal. The object itself, what it is and how it looks, how dramatic it is in color and texture and reflectivity has an effect on our brain, and that will cause you to, if you're looking at a piece of food that looks good, it smells good, you're going to start salivating almost immediately. Believe it or not, the surroundings make a big difference too. It's well known in the restaurant industry that by painting the walls a certain color, by using certain types of lighting, whether it's bright lighting or dim lighting, and the overall feeling of the room has an effect on everybody's appetite. It also has an effect on the general perception people have of the food overall. So whether they're going to come back and return as a return customer or whether they're never going to come back again, the surroundings definitely make a difference. Another good example of surroundings is like if you go into a McDonald's, McDonald's typically have bright lighting and hard seating. It's not very comfortable to sit for a while. It's not a place they intentionally designed for you to hang out. It's made bright and hard like that so that you get in, you sit down, you eat, you leave. Simple as that. You go. Other restaurants are much more comfortable, and they're really designed for you to hang out and enjoy the meal and spend some time really enjoying what you're doing. So lighting it definitely matters. Really high-end restaurants and hotels and other eateries definitely pay attention to the type of lighting they use. They actually will hire a lighting designer to come in and choose not only the light fixtures, but also the light bulbs to make sure that they will get the right appearance, they'll get the right type of mood in the dining room. Obviously, lighting out in the back in the kitchen, should just be bright and very shadow-free in order to make working in there safe and easy. But in the dining room, it's a whole different thing. One of the things that we think about with lighting is not just the fixtures and how expensive they are, but also the bulbs and how easy they are to change. The reality is that if you initially, when you're building a restaurant, you're building something like that, you're putting together light bulbs. It's good to think about that because when one light bulb burns out, chances are the rest of them are going to be shortly thereafter, they're going to be burning out right behind that one, which means changing all the light bulbs in an entire restaurant can cost hundreds of dollars. You want to think about that. But like I mentioned, the bake shop, back in the back, it's totally different than what it would be in the dining room. We're trying to create a mood, and that mood is definitely affected by the kind of lighting that we choose. So different objects absorb, reflect, and transmit light differently. So some differences are definitely chemical in nature. The ingredients or the different things that go into a recipe can definitely make a difference in how things look. For example, a cake made with yolks as opposed to a cake made with just egg whites will definitely have a different appearance. And the reason why is the yolks will affect the color. The bake time or temperature differences that we use will affect the browning of a baked product. So that affects chemical changes that are going on in the baked product in the oven. And this affects how they look. So higher heat causes more browning, and more browning can give a richer appearance to a lot of baked goods. So the object will have a relative level of reflectance, and it's really varies depending on the surface. Different objects absorb and reflect, transmit light differently. So these illustrations here are designed to show that a rough surface will scatter light and a smooth surface will reflect light. And that gives you the perception of whether something is dull or matte in finish or whether it's glossy. Generally, gloss will make something look more intensely colorful. It'll also make something look more appetizing. This is why a lot of things that we prepare, we bake them, but then we, let's say, put a glaze on them after baking. Or we will prepare something like, let's say, a mousse, and we'll put a glaze on top to give it gloss, to bring out the color, to make it look more appetizing. So the surroundings. So this can influence our perception of an object, but it's kind of an optical illusion. I used to know a guy I worked for years and years ago, and when he hired me, one of the things he said is, I really want to make sure that we're not going to have any yellow meals. And this is a guy who was very sensitive to how food looked. And I got the idea right away. What he meant was he didn't want to have, let's say, a meal where everything was yellow, right? Let's say scrambled eggs and orange juice, and let's say, hash browns. But everything is in the same color group and everything just looks the same. It becomes rather boring. And I understood that. The same thing goes for brown meals. Meals where everything is brown. An example here is a white cake on a white plate. Obviously, something white on white is going to, the white object is just going to just sort of fade into the white plate, and it's not going to be nearly as visually interesting as if you added some contrast. And of course, flavor. Flavor is more important than appearance and texture to customers. It's also called taste by a lot of people. A lot of people use these words interchangeably, but taste and flavor are really different. Flavor is made up of the basic tastes, and then smell, and then trigeminal effects. Now, trigeminal effects are things you feel in your mouth or feel in your nose in the process of eating. So a good example of a trigeminal effect is when you have, let's say, a peppermint patty. A peppermint patty candy is basically chocolate covered with a mint center. You get this strong trigeminal effect of the mint along with smell and the basic taste of the slight bitterness of the chocolate, the sweetness of the center. So you get all this stuff going on at the same time. It really is it's a much more exciting experience than if you had just, let's say, chocolate and sugar, a sugary center with no mint in it. A lot of the trigeminal effects and basic tastes and smells are all chemical in nature. These are flavor molecules that must interact with and excite chemoreceptors. That's right. See, the thing is that we're kind of programmed from the very beginning to think that food that is bitter is poison and food that is overly sour is not good for us. It's just our natural instinct, but we discovered that there are foods out there that are okay to eat in the right amounts, in the right situation. Children are especially picky about this sort of thing because little children especially are pretty much all instinct. They don't have the life experience to tell them which foods are good and which foods are bad, except for the ones that their parents show them as they grow up and they build experience. Our basic tastes are sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and then umami. Umami is the fifth taste, and that's something that was, by the word you can tell, it's Japanese, and it was something that has become recognized, I'd say, in the last 30 to 35 years. I first heard the word when I was in culinary school back in the mid-1980s, and that was about the first time it started becoming more popular. People started really talking about it. Basically, the perception of certain flavor molecules. So there are flavor molecules that are in all foods. Our saliva breaks down foods very quickly and delivers them to our chemoreceptors in our tongue. So the chemoreceptors are taste cells on the taste buds. And what they do essentially is they're able to send signals to the brain. Remember, when you're eating something, you're not just getting one signal. You're getting thousands of signals from different aspects of that food, and they're all being fed to your brain at the same time. Now, your brain is trying to recognize the combination or the patterns that we recognize through experience. So if you taste a banana, you know what a banana tastes like. When you bite into a banana, if it tastes the way a banana does, all those signals go to your brain. Your brain says, ha, banana. That's an easy one to recognize. However, if you taste something that you've never tasted before, you don't have the experience to be able to say, oh, what, I recognize that. No, you don't, because you've never had it before. So it may be a completely new, completely foreign experience to you. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad experience. It just means that it is different. It's definitely different than what you've grown up to be used to. So flavor, we've got our basic taste. We have to in order to get our basic taste, we have to have saliva to carry flavor molecules to the cells in the crevices of our taste buds, where down in the taste buds are those chemoreceptors to allow us to get the signals to the brain. Without that, it would be very difficult for us to taste anything. So the tongue and the papillae. Let's look at illustrations of this. Now, going from the right, this is the big open view. Then we get down to the individual pores that are in our tongue. And then down inside there are taste buds. And inside the taste buds are these little basal cells, these little pore and microvilli that'll help help the saliva and help the little chemicals find these cells. And the cells are hooked to nerves, which connect it to the brain and then send all that information to the brain. It's a lot to process, and at the same time, we're accustomed to it, and we have learned over time, over our lifetime, to recognize thousands of different tastes and smells and flavors. It just it takes time, but as we build that experience, we start to develop an idea of what we like and what we don't like. So don't confuse sourness with bitterness or astringency. Sourness is immediate and it immediately causes salivation. Example are pickles, yogurt, buttermilk. These are definitely sour things. That includes also lemons, limes, other things that are sour. What sour means is that it just has a lot of acid. So an orange, for example, isn't as sour as a lemon, but oranges and lemons have the same amount of sugar in them. The big difference is that the lemon has more acid, and that's why you get that sense of sour. Bitterness, on the other hand, is often delayed and it lingers. It doesn't go away. If you don't like bitter things, you'll know, because when you have something really bitter or intensely bitter, that bitterness tends to stick around, and it doesn't matter how many times you wash out your mouth, you just can't seem to get rid of it. If you've ever tried something like that, like unsweetened chocolate or black coffee, these things definitely have a strong bitter quality to them, and it's very difficult to get rid of. Then astringency is often delayed, but it causes a drying feeling, makes the tongue feel rough. A good example of that would be strong black tea and grape skins, or if you bite into grapes that have seeds and you actually bite into one of the seeds, you get astringency. And what it does essentially is it feels like it strips your mouth of all lubrication. It just feels really rough. And what that is essentially is it's a different sense. It's more of a trigeminal effect that's happening in the mouth. Then there's flavor. Let's talk about umami, the fifth basic taste. This means in Japanese, it more translates to tastiness or savoriness in Japanese. It's important in savory items, things like quiche, focaccia, pizza, but also there's a lot of other savory things, different cheeses. Peanut butter has a strong sense of umami. Soy sauce. A lot of these things have, and things like roasted mushrooms, these have very strong senses of umami. It's distinctly different than sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. And that's why they recognize it, why we've started to recognize it in the most, I'd say the last 35 years. It's because it is distinctly different and separate from those other four tastes. Now, our sense of smell is pretty darn important. It's also called aroma or olfaction. Your whole nose is called your olfactory system. It's definitely more complex than basic tastes. Humans can differentiate thousands of different smells, and most smells consist of hundreds of separate chemicals, all reacting with the cells that are in your olfactory bulb up inside your sinuses, up inside your nose. The chemoreceptors or olfactory cells are at the top of the nasal cavity. So basically, if you think of where the bridge of your nose is, and right behind there, back up inside there, is what they call the olfactory bulb. And it's basically part of the brain. It's connected directly to the brain, and it's connected to the limbic region of the brain, which is associated with emotions and feelings and memories. So that's why when you smell something, sometimes strong memories will come back the minute you smell something. And it depends on what it is, but you'll find that there are certain things that you smell that automatically trigger memories. And the reason why is because it's so connected to the emotional side of your brain. So aroma molecules must evaporate to reach your olfactory cells. There's two pathways they can come by. You can get them through orthonasal, which means that comes through the nose from the front in through your nostrils, or retronasal, where it perhaps was in your mouth already and it comes back up through around through the exhale. Either way, you're smelling. You're smelling those chemicals. Here's a really old illustration of an olfactory bulb, and all the little fingers that come down as nerves that help to perceive these different smells. Here's a more modern medical kind of illustration, and you can see how the bulb, the yellow bulb, is really right up there, tucked next to the brain, and it's very, very well connected to the brain, so that you get a lot of information coming in through the nose, but it's all being fed right into your memory circuits. So let's talk about olfaction. Is your sense of smell a more sophisticated sense, or is it more primitive? And what is it what purpose on one of the videos is they're delivered via the trigeminal nerves. The trigeminal nerves are through your mouth and around through the cavity inside your mouth. And what they do is they transmit all kinds of feelings to your brain. These are physical feelings that are have to do with the texture, or chemical effect on your mouth. Good examples are like the pungency of ginger, the burn of cinnamon, the cooling of mint, the heat of hot chilies and peppers, the tingling that you get when you drink a soda with carbon dioxide, the sting of alcohol, and many, many others. The trigeminal effects are real, and they're really quite pleasurable in many cases. We add hot chilies to things, for example. A lot of people really enjoy some spice in their food. There are people who don't enjoy that as well, but it is the trigeminal effect that they're not enjoying. If you could take out the chilies, oftentimes the people who don't enjoy the chilies would enjoy the food because the flavors are oftentimes very good. I remember my first time having Thai food, and I didn't specify how hot I wanted it, so they prepared it, according to their regular way of doing things, which was extremely hot. And luckily, I enjoy chilies. I enjoy hot food, so I enjoyed the food. But the person eating dinner with me did not enjoy it at all. Couldn't seem to taste much of anything through the meal because the chilies were overwhelming their brain with that trigeminal effect. They couldn't enjoy the meal after that. So trigeminal effects can be very strong, can be very mild, but sometimes they definitely enhance the pleasurable effect of food. So we call them chemical feeling factors, pungency, chemical irritation, chemosensory irritation, and chemethesis. But all these basically mean the same thing. They're basically all trigeminal effects. So trigeminal effects, the chemoreceptors, free nerve endings just beneath the surface of the skin. In your mouth, you do have your taste buds, but around the inside of your mouth, from the roof of your mouth to the inside of your cheeks, to your tongue, to under your tongue, and so forth, there's all nerves in there, and those nerves are being affected by the chemicals that are in foods. So the molecules must absorb through the skin. Now, when it comes to hot chilies, for example, the chemical is called capsaicin. And capsaicin, even if it's put on, let's say, your arm or your hand, you'll feel the burn of capsaicin. But even in small amounts, it'll go right through the surface of the skin inside your mouth and affect the trigeminal nerves and send signals to your mind or to your brain that, okay, we have a lot of sense of burning going on here. And sometimes, as I say, it can be mild and pleasurable, and other people enjoy it much stronger. But these are chemicals that definitely affect the skin and the nerves within your mouth. Now, of course, different people have different levels of sensitivity. Of course, So that will affect the level of pleasure that comes from eating those things. So the things that affect flavor are the nature of the ingredient. What is it? What kind of ingredient is it? So sugars, for example, and high intensity sweeteners definitely affect the overall flavor of something. The product temperature. The product temperature definitely makes a difference, and especially when something is very warm or very cold, or where you have a combination of warm and cold, will definitely affect how you perceive that food. The product texture and consistency. Thin versus thick. Something that is sticky versus more fluid. Something that is the general texture. It definitely has an effect on people. I really enjoy oysters on the half shell, for example. But I know a lot of people who really don't enjoy oysters on the half shell, and a lot of times it has to do with texture. They don't like that cold, slimy feeling of a raw oyster. They would rather have, if they're going to have an oyster, they'd rather have it cooked. So it's something that is, it definitely affects our level of enjoyment. Other factors affecting flavor, the presence of other flavors. So flavors work together. You'll see in a lot of foods where a little bit of spice and some sweetness are used together, because that sweetness tends to enhance and bring out flavors and help to balance with the spiciness. Certain acids with sugar really work together well. A good example of that is lemon juice versus lemonade, right? We add sugar and it helps to temper the acid a bit, balance it, and make it a much more enjoyable experience. The fat content in foods, low-fat foods versus fat-free foods, definitely have a different feeling in the mouth, but they also, remember, fat carries flavor. And how your saliva breaks it down will help to release those flavors and help your brain better understand all the complexity of flavors that are going on in that food. So some different examples of terms we use for texture. We've got hard, tough, chewy, crumbly, short or mealy, thick, springy, chalky, moist, dry, soft, tender, gummy, brittle, thin, spongy, gritty, pulpy, and smooth. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Imagine how many other words you could think of, adjectives that you could use to describe the different textures in food. And this is, as I say, just a small example. We've come up with a lot. And the reason why is because we have not only a very complex nose, a very complex olfactory system, but we also have a very complex sense of feeling inside of our mouth through all of those trigeminal nerves to give us a feeling of something that has an adjective associated with it. So texture is like flavor. It's complex. The appearance that we see of food helps to hint at what texture is going to be there. It's evaluated by tasting and determining how food feels against the soft tissues of the mouth. That's why we call it mouthfeel. And responds to squeezing, biting, and chewing. It also responds to the heat of the mouth. Some things feel like they melt in your mouth, when really what's going on is some are actually melting because of the heat of the mouth, but others are breaking down because of your saliva. Either way, it has a melting feeling. And the sound that you get in your head that when you're consuming something. So today's lab, we're going to be going into the lab and using our evaluation and experiment form, and to test your sense of smell at the smell center. I'll have a lot of different things to smell, and your job is to try to identify them. They're all things that are normally in the kitchen, so you should be able to identify them. But there may be some smells there that are a little less recognizable to you because maybe it's been a long time since you smelled them, or maybe you've never smelled them before. You're also going to use your form to go to the taste center. And the taste center is something where I've set it up where you're going to taste different things and try to determine what you're tasting. Mostly we're going to be focused on the 5 main tastes. and you're probably just going to try to isolate out which taste is the predominant taste. And then in a little while, after we get done all that, we'll conduct an evaluation of papillae density to determine your status, whether you are a non-taster, a taster, or a super taster. And we're going to do that to just kind of find out where you stand. You may already know that you're a super taster. You may already know that you're not a super taster. But we'll get a chance to find out in the class about who's who and what kind of density you have in your papillae. Anyway, we'll see you tomorrow. Get a chance to be there on time so we can get started right away in the lab.